17-year-old Elijah Thompson felt cold metal bite into his wrists as security officers dragged him from the boarding line. Humiliated passengers stared while he protested his innocence. Nobody believed him until the airline's CEO stormed through the terminal doors shouting, "That's my son." Before we dive into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button if you've ever experienced or witnessed racial profiling, and subscribe to follow Elijah's journey from public humiliation to powerful transformation. Elijah Thompson was not your average teenager. At 17, his brilliant mind had already earned him recognition across Atlanta's academic community. His bedroom walls displayed numerous awards for robotics, mathematics, and science competitions. Today, those achievements had culminated in something extraordinary. A prestigious scholarship to attend the summer engineering program at MIT, a stepping stone toward his dream of becoming an aerospace engineer. "Dad, where's my blue tie? The one with the silver pattern?" Elijah called out, rummaging through his meticulously organized closet. His adoptive father, Lawrence Washington, appeared at the doorway, holding the tie in question. "Looking for this?" Lawrence smiled, his tall frame filling the doorway of Elijah's bedroom. As the CEO of Skyline Airways, one of America's largest airlines, Lawrence cut an impressive figure even in casual clothes. Today, however, he wore a tailored suit, preparing for an emergency board meeting that unfortunately coincided with Elijah's departure. "Thanks," Elijah said, taking the tie. "Nervous about your meeting?" Lawrence shrugged. "Just another day navigating corporate politics. I'm more concerned about missing your send-off." Their suburban Atlanta home reflected Lawrence's success, spacious and elegant without being ostentatious. African art adorned the walls alongside family photos, honoring both Lawrence's heritage and their shared journey. 13 years ago, Lawrence had adopted Elijah after meeting him during a corporate outreach program at a local children's home. The single man and the quiet 4-year-old had formed an instant connection. "I'll be fine, Dad," Elijah assured him, expertly knotting his tie. "I've flown plenty of times." "Yes, but never alone," Lawrence pointed out, helping Elijah with his luggage. "Boston is different from Atlanta. The MIT program will be challenging, but not just academically." Lawrence didn't need to elaborate. Despite their privileged lifestyle, the beautiful home, private school education, and opportunities many teenagers could only dream of, Elijah regularly faced racism. Just last month, security had followed him around an upscale electronics store while ignoring his white classmates. 3 weeks ago, a teacher had questioned whether he had written his own paper, suggesting the vocabulary was unusually advanced for him. Lawrence, who had faced similar discrimination throughout his climb to corporate success, had always prepared Elijah for these realities. Their Sunday drives often included frank discussions about how to handle racial bias safely. "Remember what we've talked about," Lawrence said, his voice taking on the serious tone Elijah recognized from their many conversations about navigating the world as a young black man. "Always carry your ID. Keep your boarding pass accessible. If someone confronts you, stay calm, speak clearly, don't make sudden movements," Elijah recited, having heard this advice countless times. "I know, Dad." Lawrence squeezed his son's shoulder. "I've arranged for Thomas to drive you to the airport. I'll try to finish my meeting early and call you before your flight takes off." Elijah nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility on his father's shoulders. Skyline Airways employed thousands, and Lawrence never took that lightly. Still, he couldn't help feeling a twinge of disappointment that his father wouldn't be seeing him off personally. "You've got this," Lawrence said, embracing his son. "MIT won't know what hit them." As Elijah settled into the back of the company car, Thomas, their longtime driver, smiled at him through the rearview mirror. "Ready for your big adventure, Mr. Elijah?" Elijah grinned, excitement momentarily overshadowing his nervousness. "As ready as I'll ever be." The sleek black sedan pulled away from their driveway, neither passenger nor driver aware that this would be far from the smooth journey they anticipated. Atlanta International Airport hummed with activity as Elijah stepped through the sliding glass doors. The vast terminal stretched before him, a sea of hurried travelers dragging luggage across polished floors. Check-in kiosks beeped, announcements echoed overhead, and the distinct aroma of overpriced coffee permeated the air. "You're all set, sir," Thomas said, handing Elijah his luggage. "Your father asked me to make sure you got checked in properly. Would you like me to accompany you to security?" "I've got it from here," Elijah assured him with a confident smile that masked his flutter of nerves. Though he had flown numerous times with his father, navigating the airport alone felt different. "Thanks, Thomas." Elijah approached the Skyline Airways premium check-in counter, where he was greeted by a blonde attendant whose smile faltered slightly upon seeing him. Her eyes flicked to his first-class ticket, then back to his face with barely disguised surprise. "Good morning," Elijah said politely. "I'm checking in for the Boston flight." "ID, please," she requested, her tone professional but cool. Elijah handed over his driver's license, noting how she scrutinized it longer than seemed necessary. After receiving his boarding pass, Elijah headed toward security. He noticed the sideways glances from other travelers. A middle-aged woman clutched her purse tighter as he passed, and a businessman subtly shifted his laptop bag to his other side. These microaggressions were nothing new, but they still stung. The security line moved slowly. Elijah removed his shoes, belt, and laptop as required, placing them in gray bins. As he waited to walk through the scanner, his phone buzzed with a text from his best friend Devin. "Devin, dude, have you left yet? Can't believe you're going to be hanging with MIT nerds all summer Elijah smiled, typing back, about to board. And they're not nerds, they're future colleagues Devin, whatever, Einstein. Don't forget us little people when you're building rocket ships The playful exchange lightened Elijah's mood as he approached the body scanner. The TSA agent, a heavy-set man with R. Miller on his badge, gave him a hard look. "Empty your pockets completely," Miller instructed, his tone sharper than what Elijah had observed with previous passengers. Elijah complied, placing his phone and wallet in a bin. As he stepped through the scanner, he maintained the calm demeanor his father had taught him, back straight, expression neutral, movements deliberate. "Arms up higher," Miller barked. "Spread your fingers." Again, Elijah complied without comment, though he noticed the white businessman before him hadn't received such detailed instructions. After passing through, Elijah collected his belongings under Miller's watchful eye. As he tied his shoes, he overheard Miller speaking quietly to another officer, a stern-looking woman whose nameplate read, S. Holt. "That kid at the end of the line," Miller murmured, tilting his head subtly toward Elijah. "First-class ticket, designer clothes. Seems off. Maybe check him out at gate B23. Holt nodded, her eyes tracking Elijah as he walked away, unaware of their scrutiny. Elijah found his gate and settled into a chair, pulling out his tablet to review some preliminary reading for the MIT program. An article about aerospace engineering innovations absorbed his attention, momentarily distracting him from the eyes that occasionally drifted his way. 40 minutes before departure, the gate agent's voice crackled over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're now beginning the boarding process for Skyline Airways Flight 1452 to Boston. We invite our first-class passengers to board at this time." Elijah gathered his belongings, joining the short line of business travelers and well-dressed tourists at the priority boarding lane. He was so focused on retrieving his boarding pass from his phone that he didn't notice officers Miller and Holt approaching until they flanked him. "Excuse me, young man," Miller said loudly. "We need to verify your boarding pass." Elijah looked up, surprised. "Of course," he said, turning his phone screen toward them. "Here it is." Holt frowned at the digital boarding pass. "How did you get a first-class ticket?" The question caught Elijah off guard. It was purchased for me." "By whom?" Miller pressed, his voice carrying enough that nearby passengers turned to watch. "My father," Elijah replied, maintaining his composure despite the growing discomfort of being questioned so publicly. "And who might that be?" Holt asked skeptically. "Lawrence Washington. He's the CEO of Skyline Airways. Miller and Holt exchanged glances, a mix of disbelief and suspicion in their expressions. "Son," Miller said condescendingly, "making false claims won't help your situation. We need to see some identification." "I already showed my ID at security and check-in," Elijah pointed out, feeling a knot forming in his stomach. Around them, a small crowd of onlookers had gathered, some with phones raised. "We need to see it again," Holt insisted. "Now." The gate agent, a young woman named Heather Brooks, observed the interaction with visible discomfort but didn't intervene. Elijah noted her Skyline Airways uniform and wondered why she wasn't coming to his defense. "I'll get my wallet," Elijah said calmly, reaching toward his back pocket. "Hands where we can see them," Miller suddenly shouted, grabbing Elijah's arm. "I was just getting my ID," Elijah protested, his heart racing as the situation escalated without warning. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," Holt commanded, pulling out handcuffs. "This is ridiculous," Elijah said, his voice rising despite his efforts to stay calm. "Call my father. Call Lawrence Washington." But his pleas fell on deaf ears as Miller spun him around and Holt secured the cold metal handcuffs around his wrists. The clicking sound seemed to echo through the suddenly silent gate area. "You're making a huge mistake," Elijah said, his voice shaking slightly as he fought to control his emotions. Public humiliation washed over him as dozens of passengers watched, some filming, others averting their eyes in discomfort. "We have a possible case of attempted fraud and unauthorized access," Miller announced into his radio as they began leading Elijah away from the gate. African-American male, approximately 17, claiming to be related to airline executives. As they marched him through the terminal, Elijah's mind raced. This couldn't be happening. Not to him. Not today of all days. His MIT opportunity, his father's trust in him to travel alone, his careful adherence to all the rules. None of it had protected him from being treated like a criminal. And the worst part? Nobody stepped forward to help. Not the gate agent who worked for his father's airline. Not the passengers who had watched the scene unfold. Nobody. The sterile walls of the airport security room closed in around Elijah as he sat handcuffed to a metal chair. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the institutional gray table where Officer Miller tossed Elijah's wallet and phone. "So let's hear this story again," Miller said, arms crossed over his chest. "You expect us to believe Lawrence Washington, the CEO of Skyline Airways, is your father?" Elijah maintained steady eye contact despite the anger and humiliation churning inside him. "It's the truth. If you'd just let me call him, we'll handle the calls," Officer Holt interrupted, leafing through his wallet. She pulled out his driver's license, examining it closely. "This says Thompson, not Washington. I kept my birth name when he adopted me," Elijah explained for the third time, his patience wearing thin. "Please, just check with the airline. Anyone in management knows who I am." Miller snorted. "Convenient that you claim to be related to someone at the top rather than a baggage handler or flight attendant." The gate agent, Heather Brooks, hovered nervously by the door. "Should I check with my supervisor? If he really is Mr. Washington's son, we follow protocol here," Holt cut her off. "Identity verification first, then calls." Outside the room, a commotion grew. Raised voices, hurried footsteps, and the unmistakable sound of authority demanding access filtered through the door. Have you ever been wrongfully accused of something you didn't do? Have you felt that burning sense of injustice when no one believes your truth? Comment number 1 if you think the officers are completely out of line, or number 2 if you believe they're just doing their job. Hit that like button if you think Elijah deserves better treatment, and subscribe to see how this tense confrontation unfolds. What do you think will happen when Lawrence discovers his son is being detained? Get ready for an explosive encounter. Inside the security room, Elijah tensed, recognizing one of the voices. His heart pounded with equal parts relief and apprehension. "That's my father," he said quietly. Miller rolled his eyes. "Sure, kid." Seconds later, the door burst open. Lawrence Washington stood in the doorway, 6 feet 2 inches of barely contained fury in an immaculate suit. His presence commanded immediate attention, his normally composed expression replaced by cold anger as he took in the scene before him, his teenage son handcuffed to a chair, surrounded by security officers. "What the hell is going on here?" Lawrence demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. Miller stepped forward. "Sir, this is a secure area. You can't just—" "I'm Lawrence Washington, CEO of Skyline Airways," he interrupted, his gaze never leaving Elijah. "And you have my son in handcuffs." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Holt's eyes widened in recognition, while Miller's face paled beneath his tan. Brooks, the gate agent, pressed herself against the wall as if trying to disappear. "Mr. Washington," Holt began, "there seems to have been a misunderstanding. Remove those handcuffs," Lawrence ordered, cutting her off. "Now." When Miller hesitated, Lawrence pulled out his phone. "I have the Chief of Airport Operations on speed dial. Would you prefer I call him, or would you like to rectify this situation immediately?" Miller fumbled with the keys, quickly moving to unlock Elijah's restraints. The teen rubbed his wrists, red marks showing where the metal had dug into his skin. "Are you okay?" Lawrence asked his son, his voice softening. Elijah nodded, though the tremor in his hands betrayed his emotional state. "I'm fine." Lawrence turned his attention back to the officers. "I want your names, badge numbers, and an explanation of why my son was detained and handcuffed while attempting to board a flight for which he had a valid ticket." "Sir," Miller began defensively, "he claimed to be your son, which seemed highly unlikely given the circumstances." "What circumstances?" Lawrence demanded. "The circumstance of being black while flying first class." Before Miller could respond, the door opened again, revealing Gloria Patterson, the airport director, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight bun. "Lawrence," she said, her professional demeanor tinged with obvious distress. "I just heard what happened. I can assure you this will be thoroughly investigated." "It will be more than investigated," Lawrence replied, helping Elijah gather his belongings. "These officers racially profiled my son, publicly humiliated him, and physically restrained him without cause. There will be consequences." Patterson nodded gravely. "Of course. Officers Miller and Holt will be placed on administrative leave effective immediately pending a full review." Miller's face flushed with anger. "We were following security protocols. Which protocol instructs you to handcuff a minor for reaching for his identification?" Lawrence questioned sharply. "Which protocol encourages you to ignore his explanation without verification?" The security officers had no answer. Outside the room, the situation had escalated further. News of what happened had spread through the terminal, and passengers who had witnessed Elijah's detention were sharing their videos online. Already, several news vans had arrived at the airport, and reporters were requesting statements. "Mr. Washington," Patterson said quietly, "there's media outside. I can arrange for you and Elijah to exit through a private entrance." Lawrence looked at his son. "Elijah? Your choice. We can avoid them or make a statement." Elijah straightened his shoulders, his father's strength reflected in his posture. "They're going to tell this story whether we speak or not. Better they hear it from us." Lawrence nodded with pride. "That's my son." As they exited the security area, camera flashes exploded around them. Microphones thrust forward as reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Washington, can you confirm your son was detained?" "Elijah, how do you feel about what happened? Will Skyline Airways be making changes to security protocols?" Lawrence raised a hand, and the crowd quieted. With his arm around Elijah's shoulders, he addressed the cameras. "Today, my son Elijah was racially profiled, publicly humiliated, and physically restrained while attempting to board one of my own airline's flights. Despite identifying himself correctly, security personnel chose to handcuff him rather than verify his identity. This incident reflects the reality that many Black Americans face daily, presumed guilty until proven innocent, even when they've done nothing wrong." Elijah stepped forward, his voice steady despite his ordeal. "I followed every rule. I had the proper identification. I was respectful. None of that mattered because some people look at me and see a threat instead of a person. A reporter called out, "Will you be pursuing legal action?" Lawrence's expression hardened. "What I will be pursuing is systemic change, within Skyline Airways and, hopefully, across the airline industry. No passenger should be treated as Elijah was today, regardless of who their father is." As cameras continued to flash around them, Lawrence guided Elijah toward the private exit Patterson had arranged. The media frenzy followed, but security created a path for them to leave. In the privacy of their car, Elijah finally allowed his composure to crack. His hands trembled as he fastened his seatbelt. "Your trip to MIT?" Lawrence began. Elijah shook his head. "I don't think I can get on a plane today." Lawrence nodded, understanding completely. "We'll figure it out. I'm so sorry this happened to you, son." "Not your fault," Elijah said quietly, looking out the window as the airport receded behind them. But Lawrence's expression suggested he didn't entirely agree. As CEO of the airline, he bore some responsibility for the culture that had allowed this incident to occur. And as Elijah's father, he felt he had failed to protect him. Neither spoke as the car merged onto the highway, both processing the events that had just upended their lives. The phone in Lawrence's pocket buzzed incessantly with calls from board members, PR representatives, and journalists, all demanding his attention. But for now, his focus remained solely on his son, whose bright future had just collided violently with America's persistent reality. The video spread like wildfire across social media platforms. 15-second clips showing a black teenager in handcuffs, being led away from a Skyline Airways gate. Longer versions captured his protests, his mention of his father, and the disbelief of the officers. By the time Lawrence and Elijah reached their home, the footage had been viewed millions of times, and #Skyline Racism was trending nationwide. Lawrence's phone hadn't stopped ringing. In the privacy of his home office, he fielded calls from board members while Elijah retreated to his room, overwhelmed by the sudden unwanted attention. "Yes, Charles, I understand the stock implications," Lawrence said to the board chairman, pacing beside his desk. "But with all due respect, my priority right now is my son. No, I will not be issuing a statement that downplays what happened. Because it would be dishonest and disrespectful to Elijah's experience." He ended the call abruptly, rubbing his temples. The situation was spiraling in ways he hadn't anticipated. While Lawrence had navigated countless corporate crises during his career, none had been so deeply personal. Meanwhile, in the Skyline Airways corporate headquarters across town, the PR team huddled in a crisis management session. "The optics couldn't be worse," said Victoria Chen, the head of public relations, addressing a room of anxious executives. "The CEO's son racially profiled by our own contracted security. Social media is calling for boycotts, celebrities are canceling their Skyline memberships, and the stock has dropped 8 points since the market opened. What's Washington saying?" asked Bradley Reynolds, Chief Operations Officer, his face grim. "Nothing officially yet," Victoria replied. "He's with his son. But unofficially, he's furious and refusing to issue any statement that minimizes what happened." "Can we blame this entirely on airport security?" suggested Martin Blackwell, a senior vice president. "Technically, they're not Skyline employees." Victoria shook her head. "They were enforcing our boarding protocols at our gate. We can't distance ourselves without appearing to pass the buck. Plus, our gate agent didn't intervene. We're implicated whether we like it or not." At the airport, the aftermath continued to unfold. Officers Miller and Holt had been escorted from the premises, their badges and access cards temporarily suspended. Airport Director Patterson faced a barrage of questions from both the media and her superiors. "Yes, sir," she said into her phone, standing in her office overlooking the tarmac. "I've ordered a complete review of all security footage. The officers claimed they were following protocol for suspected ticket fraud. No, I don't believe racial bias training has been updated in the last 18 months. Yes, sir, I understand the severity. In a small break room near Gate B23, Heather Brooks sat alone, replaying the incident in her mind. She should have recognized Elijah Thompson. She should have intervened. Now her face was visible in the viral videos, her inaction forever documented. Her phone buzzed with a text from her supervisor, *meeting tomorrow 8 a.m. Mandatory, across town, in a modest apartment, Ronald Miller poured himself a stiff drink. 22 years in airport security without incident, and now this. He'd been so certain the kid was trying to scam his way into first class. The way he'd reached for his pocket, it had seemed threatening at the time. Now, replaying it in his mind, Miller questioned his own perception. Had he really seen a threat, or had he merely expected to see one? Back at the Washington residence, Elijah sat on his bed, scrolling through his phone. Messages flooded in from friends, classmates, and even strangers who had somehow found his social media accounts. His best friend Devin had called 12 times. Finally, Elijah answered. "Dude!" Devin exclaimed. "Are you okay? You're everywhere online." "I'm fine," Elijah replied automatically, though he was far from it. "That was messed up what they did to you. But your dad was awesome." "When he stormed in like that, I don't really want to talk about it right now," Elijah interrupted, the memory still too raw. Devin paused. "Yeah, of course. Sorry. Just, let me know if you need anything." After hanging up, Elijah stared at the ceiling. His excitement about MIT seemed distant now, overshadowed by the public humiliation he'd experienced. His wrists still bore faint red marks from the handcuffs. Worse than the physical discomfort was the emotional impact, the feeling of helplessness, of being viewed as inherently suspicious despite doing everything right. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Lawrence entered, carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate, a comfort ritual from Elijah's childhood. "How are you holding up?" Lawrence asked, handing Elijah a mug. Elijah shrugged. "Everyone's seen the videos. I keep getting messages from people I don't even know." Lawrence sat beside him on the bed. "I know this isn't what you wanted, especially today of all days. We need to talk about MIT. The program starts tomorrow," Elijah said flatly. "I've spoken with the program director," Lawrence replied. "Given the circumstances, they're willing to let you start late, or even defer until next summer if that's what you prefer." Elijah stared into his mug, conflicted. The MIT program represented everything he'd worked toward, a stepping stone to his future in aerospace engineering. But the thought of boarding another plane so soon after today's trauma made his stomach clench. "What do you think I should do?" he asked. Lawrence chose his words carefully. "I think you should make whatever decision will allow you to heal. If that means taking time, take time. If that means pushing forward, then push forward. But don't let what happened today define your path." Before Elijah could respond, Lawrence's phone rang again. Seeing the caller ID, he sighed. "It's the board. I need to take this." As Lawrence stepped out to take the call, Elijah turned on his television. Every news channel seemed to be covering the story. Political pundits debated whether this was an isolated incident or evidence of systemic racism. Aviation experts discussed security protocols. Social media reactions scrolled across the bottom of the screen, ranging from supportive to horrifyingly racist. One commentator caught Elijah's attention. "The question we should be asking is whether this young man would have been treated differently if he weren't black. And if the answer is yes, which I believe it is, then we need to examine why our first instinct is to criminalize black youth." Elijah turned off the TV, unable to stomach being discussed like a case study rather than a person. He opened his laptop instead, intending to distract himself with MIT preparation materials, but found himself typing "racial profiling in airports" into the search bar. The results were overwhelming, countless stories similar to his own. Black passengers questioned about first-class tickets. Muslim travelers subjected to random searches. Latino flyers asked for additional identification. His experience wasn't unique, it was part of a pattern so common that many minority travelers considered it an inevitable part of flying. In the hallway, Lawrence's voice grew louder. "No, I will not step back from this situation. Because this isn't just about Skyline's image, Charles. This is about my son. If the board feels my leadership is compromised by my concern for my son's civil rights, then perhaps you should call for a vote of confidence." Elijah closed his laptop, Lawrence's words echoing in his mind. His father was putting his position on the line, a position he'd worked decades to achieve, over this incident. The weight of that reality settled heavily on Elijah's shoulders. Lawrence returned, his expression tense but determined. "The board has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. They're concerned about how this incident will affect the company." "Are you in trouble because of me?" Elijah asked quietly. Lawrence sat beside him again. "No. I'm in trouble because Skyline Airways, my airline, allowed a paying passenger to be racially profiled and publicly humiliated. The fact that the passenger was my son only makes me more determined to address the underlying issues." "What's going to happen?" "I don't know," Lawrence admitted. "But whatever happens, we'll face it together." Outside their home, 3 news vans had parked across the street. Reporters stood with microphones, ready to pounce on any development in the story that had captured national attention. Inside, father and son sat in silence, bound by shared pain and uncertainty about the path forward. The Skyline Airways boardroom crackled with tension. 14 executives sat around a gleaming mahogany table, their reflections visible in its polished surface. Charts displaying plummeting stock prices and social media sentiment analyses projected onto the wall. Lawrence Washington stood at the head of the table, his posture rigid but composed. "Before we begin," Lawrence said, addressing the grim-faced board members, "I want to make my position clear. What happened to my son yesterday was not an isolated incident. It was the result of systemic issues within our security protocols and company culture. Any discussion about moving forward must acknowledge this reality." Charles Harrington, the board chairman, leaned forward. A white-haired man with decades in the airline industry, he had been Lawrence's mentor once, but their relationship had grown increasingly strained. "Lawrence," he began, his tone measured, "no one is denying what happened to Elijah was unfortunate. But we need to approach this strategically. Our stock has dropped 12%. Customers are canceling reservations. We're facing a PR crisis that could cost the company millions." "Unfortunate?" Lawrence repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "My 17-year-old son was handcuffed and publicly humiliated while attempting to board one of our flights. Unfortunate doesn't begin to cover it." Victoria Chen, the PR director, cleared her throat. "We've prepared a statement expressing regret for the incident and announcing a review of security protocols. We believe this balanced approach will help stabilize the situation without acknowledging the racial element," Lawrence finished for her. "That's not acceptable." Martin Blackwell, who had always been a thorn in Lawrence's side, scoffed. "Let's be realistic. If we make this about race, we'll alienate half our customer base. This needs to be framed as a procedural error, not a civil rights issue." Lawrence fixed him with a cold stare. "It was both, Martin. And I won't pretend otherwise to make people comfortable." The boardroom door opened, and all heads turned as Elijah entered. He wore a crisp button-down shirt and slacks, his expression calm despite the sea of surprised faces. "Elijah," Lawrence said, surprised. "I thought you were waiting outside." "I wanted to be here," Elijah replied, his voice steady as he took a seat beside his father. "If you're discussing what happened to me, I should have a voice in the conversation." Charles frowned. "This is a closed board meeting. With all due respect, my son stays," Lawrence stated firmly. "Unless anyone wants to call security to remove him. That worked out so well yesterday." No one challenged him further. Elijah addressed the room. "I understand you're concerned about the company's image and finances. But this isn't just about me. What happened yesterday happens to black travelers every day. The only difference is that most don't have a CEO father to intervene. The board members shifted uncomfortably. "What would you have us do?" asked Rebecca Winters, one of the few women on the board. "Start by acknowledging the truth," Elijah replied. "Then change the systems that allowed this to happen. Security can maintain safety without assuming black passengers are threats." Lawrence nodded, pride evident in his expression. "I'm proposing a comprehensive overhaul of our security training and protocols. Mandatory bias training for all customer-facing staff. An independent review of past complaints involving racial profiling. And a public commitment to creating an airline where all passengers are treated with equal dignity. The cost would be substantial," warned the CFO, James Peterson. "Especially with our stock already down. The cost of doing nothing would be greater," Lawrence countered. "Not just financially, but morally." The debate continued for hours. Some board members argued for a more cautious approach, while others supported Lawrence's vision. Throughout it all, Elijah remained composed, offering his perspective when asked but mostly observing the corporate politics at play. Finally, Charles called for a break. As board members filed out to get coffee or make calls, he approached Lawrence and Elijah privately. "You're putting me in a difficult position, Lawrence," he said quietly. "Half the board thinks you're letting personal feelings cloud your judgment. They're considering calling for a vote of confidence." Lawrence met his gaze steadily. "Let them. You've built this airline from nothing. Are you really willing to risk it all over this? If this means standing up for what's right." "Yes." Lawrence placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder. "Some things are more important than a title or a stock price." Charles sighed heavily. "I've always admired your principles, Lawrence. I just hope they don't cost you everything you've worked for." As Charles walked away, Elijah turned to his father. "Dad, I don't want you to lose your position because of me." Lawrence shook his head. "If I compromise my integrity, if I fail to stand up for my own son, what kind of CEO would I be? What kind of father?" The board reconvened, and after another hour of tense discussion, they reached a tentative agreement. Skyline Airways would issue a statement acknowledging the racial component of the incident, apologize to Elijah, and announce a comprehensive review of security procedures. In return, Lawrence would allow the PR team some input on messaging to help mitigate stock impacts. As the meeting concluded, Lawrence received a call from Gloria Patterson, the airport director. "Lawrence, I thought you should know," she said, her voice tight. "We've completed our preliminary review of Officer Miller's record. There have been 3 previous complaints of racial profiling filed against him in the past 18 months. All were dismissed without thorough investigation." Lawrence's jaw clenched. "And Officer Holt? No prior complaints, but she was following Miller's lead as the senior officer. She's expressed remorse and requested to be included in any bias training program developed. Thank you for the information, Gloria. I'll be in touch." After hanging up, Lawrence shared the news with Elijah as they walked toward the elevator. "So it wasn't just me," Elijah said quietly. "He's been doing this to other people." "Yes. But because of you, he won't be doing it anymore." As they exited the Skyline headquarters, reporters swarmed them once again. This time, Lawrence stepped forward with Elijah by his side, ready to address the cameras with a united front. "Skyline Airways acknowledges that what happened to my son yesterday was not just a procedural error but an instance of racial profiling," Lawrence stated firmly. "We are committed to implementing changes that will ensure all passengers are treated with equal respect and dignity, regardless of their race or background." A reporter called out, "Mr. Washington, some are saying you're too emotionally involved to handle this situation objectively. How do you respond?" Lawrence smiled slightly. "I would say that sometimes emotional investment is exactly what's needed to drive meaningful change. My experience as Elijah's father doesn't compromise my judgment as CEO, it enhances it. It reminds me that behind every policy, every protocol, are real people whose dignity matters." Another shouted, "Elijah, will you still be attending the MIT program?" Elijah stepped forward. "Yes. I won't let this incident derail my future. But I also won't pretend it didn't happen. Part of moving forward is acknowledging the reality of racism in America and working to change it. As they departed, Lawrence noticed a change in his son, a new determination in his eyes, a stronger set to his shoulders. The incident had affected Elijah deeply, but it hadn't broken him. If anything, it seemed to have awakened something powerful within him. Back at home, they discussed the logistics of getting Elijah to Boston without subjecting him to another potentially traumatic airport experience. I could drive you, Lawrence offered. It's about 15 hours, but we could make it in 2 days. Elijah considered this, then shook his head. No. I need to fly again, sooner rather than later. If I don't, the fear wins. Lawrence nodded, understanding his son's reasoning. I'll arrange a private flight. And I'll be with you the entire time. That night, as Lawrence worked in his home office, coordinating with the PR team on the official statement, Elijah appeared in the doorway. Dad? I've been thinking about something. Lawrence looked up from his computer. What's on your mind? This whole situation, it's horrible, but maybe we can make something good come from it. Elijah stepped into the office, his expression thoughtful. What if I helped design the bias training program? I could provide the perspective of someone who's experienced profiling firsthand. Lawrence leaned back in his chair, considering. That's actually brilliant. Authentic input from someone directly affected would make the training more impactful. I could work on it remotely from MIT, Elijah continued, warming to the idea. It would give me a purpose beyond just being the CEO's son who got handcuffed. Pride swelled in Lawrence's chest. Even in the midst of trauma and public scrutiny, his son was thinking of ways to create positive change. I think that's an excellent proposal. We'll present it to the board tomorrow. As Elijah turned to leave, Lawrence called after him. Elijah? I know I've said this before, but I am so proud of the man you're becoming. A small smile crossed Elijah's face, the first genuine one since the incident. I learned from the best. Outside, the news vans had finally departed, but the impact of what had occurred continued to reverberate through their lives. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, another board meeting, Elijah's journey to MIT, and the beginning of their fight for systemic change. But for now, in the quiet of their home, father and son had found a moment of peace and a shared sense of purpose that transcended their individual pain. 3 days after the incident, Elijah settled into his dormitory at MIT. The spacious room felt both exciting and intimidating, a symbol of the future he'd worked toward, now tinged with the weight of recent events. His roommate, Connor Williams, a lanky physics prodigy from Seattle, had watched the viral videos before Elijah's arrival. That was really messed up, what happened to you, Connor said awkwardly as they unpacked. I'm sorry you had to go through that. Elijah nodded, appreciating the sentiment but tired of discussing the incident. Thanks. Does it feel weird? Being recognized everywhere? It did. Walking across campus, Elijah had noticed the double takes, the whispered conversations, the occasional smartphone raised in his direction. His story had transcended traditional news cycles, becoming a cultural talking point. Late-night hosts referenced it in monologues. Opinion pieces cited it as evidence of persistent racism in American institutions. Some conservative commentators questioned whether Lawrence was exploiting the situation for corporate virtue signaling. I'm trying not to let it define me, Elijah answered finally. I'm here to study aerospace engineering, not to be that kid from the airport. Connor seemed to understand, changing the subject to their upcoming orientation schedule. But even as they discussed classes and campus activities, Elijah's phone continued buzzing with notifications. News alerts about Skyline Airways stock price. Messages from family friends expressing support. Interview requests from magazines and television shows. Have you ever experienced a moment when your private pain became public property? When strangers felt entitled to opinions about your trauma? Comment number 1 if you think Elijah should use his unexpected platform to push for change, or comment number 2 if you believe he should focus on his education and personal healing. Like this video if you admire how he's handling this intense pressure, and subscribe to follow his journey toward turning injustice into meaningful action. What would you do if you were suddenly thrust into the spotlight over a traumatic experience? Meanwhile, back in Atlanta, Lawrence faced the most challenging period of his professional life. Skyline Airways stock had stabilized somewhat following their official statement, but remained significantly below its previous value. Some major corporate clients had paused their contracts pending the outcomes of the promised reforms. And within the company itself, divisions had emerged between those who supported Lawrence's stance and those who felt he was sacrificing business interests for personal reasons. "The quarterly projections are concerning," said James Peterson, the CFO, during a tense executive meeting. "We're looking at a potential 15% revenue decrease if current trends continue." Lawrence absorbed this information calmly. "And how much would we lose if we did nothing and allowed our reputation to be defined by racial profiling?" "That's speculative," Peterson countered. "What's not speculative is that implementing your proposed changes will cost millions. The bias training alone is necessary," Lawrence finished firmly. "This isn't just about my son anymore. It's about who we are as a company." Victoria Chen, the PR director, cleared her throat. "Actually, our latest consumer surveys suggest Lawrence's approach might be right from a business perspective too. 72% of younger travelers say they consider a company's values when booking flights. Our commitment to addressing this issue head-on is resonating with that demographic." Lawrence nodded appreciatively at Victoria. She had initially pushed for a more sanitized response, but had quickly aligned with his vision once she understood his resolve. After the meeting, Charles Harrington asked Lawrence to stay behind. The board chairman's expression was grave. "Martin Blackwell is gathering support for a vote of no confidence," he said once they were alone. "He's convinced 5 board members that your judgment is compromised." Lawrence had expected this. Blackwell had opposed him on numerous issues over the years, and clearly saw this situation as an opportunity to stage a corporate coup. "And where do you stand, Charles?" The older man sighed heavily. "I've known you for 20 years, Lawrence. I recruited you to this company. I supported your rise to CEO. But I'm concerned you're letting your role as Elijah's father overshadow your responsibilities to shareholders." "I see them as aligned, not in conflict," Lawrence replied. "Creating an airline where all passengers are treated with dignity isn't just morally right, it's good business. Customers want to support companies that reflect their values." "Perhaps," Charles conceded. "But the board meeting tomorrow will be contentious. Blackwell is bringing in quarterly projections, stock analyses, risk assessments, all suggesting your approach will damage Skyline financially. Then I'll need to be equally prepared to make my case." After Charles left, Lawrence sat alone in his office, staring out at the Atlanta skyline. He had built his career methodically, overcoming countless obstacles as a black man in a predominantly white industry. Skyline Airways represented decades of work, persistence, and strategic vision. The thought of losing it all was painful. But not as painful as the memory of Elijah in handcuffs. His phone rang, Elijah calling from MIT. Lawrence answered immediately. "How's orientation going?" he asked, pushing aside his business concerns. "Good," Elijah replied. "The aerospace program is amazing. But that's not why I'm calling. I've been working on something I want to show you." "The bias training proposal?" "Actually, something different. I've been talking with some engineering students here about using technology to address implicit bias in security situations. What if we developed an AI system that could flag potential bias in real-time security decisions?" Lawrence sat forward, intrigued. "Go on." "The system would analyze security interventions against objective risk factors, identifying patterns of disproportionate actions against minority passengers. It could provide a counterbalance to human bias." Pride swelled in Lawrence's chest. Even amid his own trauma, Elijah was thinking of innovative solutions. "That's brilliant, son. Would you be willing to present this concept at tomorrow's board meeting?" "Remotely, of course. You think they'd listen to me?" I think they need to hear from you. This isn't just about policies and procedures. It's about real people. After their call, Lawrence worked late into the night, preparing for the board showdown. He gathered data on companies that had faced similar crises, statistics on racial profiling in transportation, and projections showing how ethical leadership could enhance brand value long-term. He also reached out personally to several key investors, explaining his vision for Skyline's future. Meanwhile, across town, Ronald Miller sat in his modest living room, a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the coffee table. The television played news coverage of the incident, showing his face as he handcuffed Elijah. 3 days of paid administrative leave had given him too much time to think, to replay his actions, to question his instincts. His union representative had assured him he'd likely keep his job. "You followed protocol for suspected ticket fraud," she'd said. "We'll argue you had reasonable suspicion based on behavioral cues, not race." But alone with his thoughts, Miller wasn't so sure. Would he have responded the same way to a white teenager in expensive clothes? The honest answer made him deeply uncomfortable. His phone rang, Sandra Holt calling. "Have you seen the news?" she asked without preamble. "They're saying Miller has previous complaints about racial profiling." "I haven't heard anything," Miller replied defensively. "I've been thinking about what happened," Holt continued. "We really messed up, Ron. That kid was just trying to board his flight." Miller grunted noncommittally. "I've requested to be included in whatever bias training program they develop," she added. "Maybe you should too." "I don't need training to do my job," Miller snapped, then immediately regretted his tone. "Look, Sandra, I need to go. We'll talk later." He hung up, poured another drink, and tried to ignore the gnawing feeling that perhaps his entire approach to security, the instincts he'd trusted for decades, might be fundamentally flawed. Back at MIT, Elijah finished polishing his presentation for the board meeting. Connor watched from across the room, impressed. "So you're basically designing a system to prevent what happened to you from happening to others?" he asked. Elijah nodded. "That's the goal. Turn something negative into something positive. That's pretty cool, man. Most people would just be angry." "Oh, I'm still angry," Elijah clarified. "But anger alone doesn't fix anything." As he prepared for bed, Elijah received a text from his father. "Whatever happens tomorrow, remember that standing up for what's right is never a mistake." Elijah stared at the message, understanding its implications. His father might lose his position as CEO, the career he'd built over decades, because he refused to minimize or excuse what had happened. The weight of that possibility settled heavily on Elijah's shoulders. Yet alongside the guilt was a fierce pride. His father was showing him through actions, not just words, that principles mattered more than position, that justice was worth fighting for even at personal cost. It was a lesson more valuable than any he would learn at MIT. Elijah replied, "I'm ready for tomorrow. We'll face it together." Across the country, in boardrooms and living rooms, in news studios and online forums, people continued to debate what had happened at Atlanta International Airport. But for Elijah and Lawrence, the path forward was clear: transform a moment of injustice into a movement for change, regardless of the personal price. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows of Skyline Airways' executive conference room as board members took their seats. The atmosphere was charged with tension, with Martin Blackwell and his allies clustered at one end of the table, while Lawrence's supporters gathered at the other. In the center, undecided members waited nervously for the proceedings to begin. A large screen dominated the front wall, where Elijah would join remotely from MIT. Lawrence stood alone at the head of the table, his posture relaxed but determined. If this was to be his last day as CEO, he would face it with dignity. "Before we begin," Charles Harrington announced, "I want to remind everyone that this is a professional discussion about the future of Skyline Airways. Personal attacks will not be tolerated." Blackwell leaned forward. "Let's cut to the chase. We're here because Lawrence Washington has placed his personal feelings about his son's unfortunate experience above his fiduciary duty to this company. The numbers don't lie, our stock is down, bookings have decreased, and the proposed changes will cost millions. Lawrence remained calm. Martin, I appreciate your concern for the company's finances. But I'd argue that what threatens Skyline isn't my response to the incident, but the incident itself. If we don't address the underlying issues that allowed a passenger to be racially profiled and handcuffed at our gate, we risk more than temporary stock fluctuations, we risk our entire brand identity. Victoria Chen presented data showing that while immediate reactions have been negative, consumer sentiment was shifting. Our research indicates that younger travelers and business clients with strong diversity commitments actually approve of our transparent approach. They see it as evidence that Skyline takes responsibility and addresses problems head-on. For the next hour, arguments flew back and forth. Financial projections were presented, PR strategies debated, and legal implications discussed. Throughout it all, Lawrence maintained his position. Skyline Airways needed comprehensive reforms to prevent similar incidents, regardless of short-term costs. Finally, it was time for Elijah's presentation. The screen flickered to life, showing the teenager in a button-down shirt, looking professional despite his youth. "Good morning," Elijah began, his voice steady. "Thank you for allowing me to speak today. I'd like to present not just my experience, but a potential solution that could benefit Skyline Airways and the entire airline industry." Over the next 15 minutes, Elijah outlined his concept for an AI-based system that would analyze security interventions for potential bias. The technology would flag disparities in how different demographic groups were treated, providing real-time feedback to security personnel and generating data that could improve training and protocols. "This isn't about punishing security officers for doing their jobs," Elijah explained. "It's about giving them better tools to ensure they're making decisions based on genuine risk factors rather than unconscious biases we all have." The board members listened attentively, many taking notes. Even Blackwell seemed impressed by the teenager's poise and innovative thinking. When Elijah finished, Charles asked, "Where would the expertise come from to develop such a system?" "MIT has leading researchers in both AI ethics and security systems," Elijah replied. "I've already spoken with Professor Daniela Rivera, who expressed interest in a potential partnership. This could position Skyline as an industry leader in ethical security practices." Lawrence watched with pride as his son handled follow-up questions with confidence and clarity. When the video call ended, the mood in the boardroom had shifted noticeably. "I move that we table the vote of no confidence," said Rebecca Winters, who had previously been undecided. Lawrence and Elijah have presented a vision that could transform this crisis into an opportunity for Skyline to lead meaningful change in the industry. Blackwell frowned. "Let's not be swayed by a slick presentation. The financial realities," Lawrence interrupted, "include the long-term value of being recognized as an airline that treats all passengers with dignity. Martin, you're looking at next quarter. I'm looking at the next decade." Charles called for a vote. 8 board members supported Lawrence's continued leadership and proposed reforms. 5, including Blackwell, voted against. 1 abstained. Lawrence had survived the challenge, but the narrow margin revealed how precarious his position remained. He would need to deliver results, both ethical and financial, to maintain the board's confidence. After the meeting, Charles approached Lawrence privately. "You won today, but Martin won't give up. Be careful." Lawrence nodded. "I know. But I couldn't approach this any other way." "Your son is impressive," Charles added. "That AI concept could be revolutionary if it works." "He's always been brilliant," Lawrence replied. "But this experience has given him a purpose beyond academic achievement. He wants to prevent others from experiencing what he did." While Lawrence secured his position at Skyline, Elijah faced his own challenges at MIT. News of his board presentation spread across campus, further cementing his identity as the kid from the viral video, rather than just another engineering student. Some professors were intrigued by his AI concept and offered mentorship. Others seemed uncomfortable around him, perhaps uncertain how to address what had happened or worried about saying the wrong thing. Fellow students reacted with a mixture of fascination, sympathy, and occasional resentment of the attention he received. One classmate commented loudly in the dining hall, "Some people get into MIT based on merit. Others get in and then get famous for playing the race card." Elijah had pretended not to hear, focusing on his meal instead of engaging. His father had taught him to choose his battles carefully, and academic success remained his priority. Professor Rivera, a leading expert in AI ethics whom Elijah had mentioned to the board, invited him to her office to discuss his concept in detail. "The technical aspects are promising," she said, reviewing his preliminary design. "But have you considered the ethical implications? Any AI system reflects the biases of its creators and the data it's trained on." Elijah nodded. "That's why diverse input would be essential. The system would need to be developed by a team that includes people from different racial backgrounds, security experts, and civil rights attorneys." "Exactly," Rivera smiled. "I'm impressed by your awareness of these complexities. Most first-year students focus solely on the technical challenge." "I've had a crash course in the real-world implications of bias," Elijah replied wryly. Meanwhile, Lawrence worked to implement the promised reforms at Skyline. He assembled a task force including security experts, diversity consultants, and customer experience specialists. Their first action was reviewing all complaints involving potential racial bias over the past 5 years, revealing a pattern that had previously gone unaddressed. "We've identified 27 incidents with strong evidence of racial profiling," reported Amara Jenkins, the diversity consultant Lawrence had hired. "Most were dismissed with minimal investigation. There's a clear pattern of minority passengers being singled out for additional scrutiny, particularly in first-class sections." Lawrence wasn't surprised, but the confirmation still stung. "And Officer Miller? 6 complaints in total, all from minority passengers. His supervisor dismissed them as passengers being oversensitive or misinterpreting standard security procedures." This information strengthened Lawrence's resolve to create systemic change. He authorized the development of new training protocols, revised security guidelines that emphasized objective risk factors rather than subjective impressions, and established an independent review board for passenger complaints. These changes weren't universally popular. Some security staff resisted, claiming the new approaches would hamper their ability to identify genuine threats. Certain board members continued questioning the costs. And online, debate raged between those who saw Skyline's actions as necessary corrections and those who dismissed them as political correctness gone mad. 2 weeks after the incident, Lawrence arranged a major interview with a respected television journalist. Both he and Elijah would participate, taking control of their narrative rather than allowing others to define it. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Lawrence asked Elijah during their pre-interview preparation. "Once it airs, there's no going back." Elijah nodded, though nervousness showed in his eyes. "People are already talking about what happened. At least this way, I get to tell my own story." The interview took place in their Atlanta home, creating a more personal atmosphere than a studio setting. Elijah spoke eloquently about his experience, neither downplaying the trauma nor presenting himself as a helpless victim. "The hardest part wasn't the handcuffs," he explained. "It was the assumption that I didn't belong in first class, that I must have been doing something wrong just by being there." Lawrence described his feelings upon learning what had happened. "As a father, I felt rage and heartbreak. As CEO of the airline responsible, I felt shame. Those emotions aren't in conflict, they've driven me to ensure this never happens to another passenger." The interviewer asked challenging questions about whether Lawrence's response was proportionate, whether Elijah's proposed AI system was practical, and how they had handled the intense public attention. Both father and son answered thoughtfully, acknowledging complexities while standing firm on core principles. Lawrence emphasized that creating a more equitable security system would benefit all passengers, not just minorities. Elijah highlighted how technology could support, rather than replace, human judgment. The interview aired nationally 3 days later to generally positive reception. Many viewers commented on Elijah's poise and Lawrence's integrity. But as with anything touching on race in America, reactions split along predictable lines. Conservative commentators accused them of exaggerating the incident's significance, while progressive voices praised their willingness to confront systemic issues. Within Skyline Airways, the interview solidified Lawrence's authority. Even skeptical executives recognized that his approach had helped stabilize the company's public image and set a clear direction forward. The stock price, which had dropped sharply after the incident, began a slow recovery. Ronald Miller watched the interview alone in his apartment. Seeing Elijah speak calmly about being handcuffed, about feeling criminalized for simply existing in a space where others assumed he didn't belong, forced Miller to confront uncomfortable truths about his own assumptions. The next morning, he contacted Skyline's HR department to request inclusion in the bias training program. For Elijah, the interview marked a turning point. Having shared his story on his own terms, he felt ready to refocus on his education while continuing to develop his AI concept. Professor Rivera had connected him with a research team interested in collaborating, turning his idea from theoretical to practical. As father and son navigated their new reality, Lawrence implementing reforms at Skyline while defending his position, Elijah balancing academics with his emerging role as an advocate. They drew strength from each other and from the knowledge that their ordeal might ultimately create positive change. The path forward wouldn't be easy. There would be more resistance, more criticism, more challenges to overcome. But they had already transformed a moment of injustice into a movement for change, and that was just the beginning. 3 months after the incident at Atlanta International Airport, Elijah sat in Professor Rivera's lab at MIT, surrounded by computer screens displaying complex algorithms. What had begun as a concept born from personal trauma was evolving into a sophisticated system with potential industry-wide applications. "The pattern recognition module is showing promising results," said Devin Carter, Elijah's childhood friend who had transferred to MIT's computer science program partly to work on this project. "We've run simulations using anonymized security intervention data from 3 major airports, and the system successfully identified statistical anomalies in how different demographic groups were treated." Elijah nodded, studying the data visualizations. "But we still need to refine the real-time alert components. Security officers need actionable feedback without feeling like they're being constantly monitored or second-guessed." Professor Rivera entered the lab, carrying a tablet displaying a news article. "Have you seen this? The Transportation Security Administration is expressing interest in bias mitigation technologies. Your timing might be perfect." The article detailed growing pressure on the TSA to address disparities in security screening practices. Several civil rights organizations had cited the Skyline incident, as Elijah's experience was now commonly called, as evidence of persistent problems in airport security. "We should prepare a proposal," Devin suggested excitedly. "If the TSA implemented something like this nationwide, let's not get ahead of ourselves," Elijah cautioned. "We're still in the development phase. But yes, we should definitely watch this opportunity." Later that evening, during his weekly video call with his father, Elijah shared the news about the TSA's interest. "That's fantastic," Lawrence said, his face brightening even through the digital connection. "From personal trauma to national policy change, that's impact, son." Elijah smiled, though something in his expression suggested mixed emotions. "How are things at Skyline?" Lawrence's expression grew more serious. "Challenging. The new security protocols are being implemented across all our hubs, and the bias training program is underway. There's resistance from some quarters, but also surprising support from others." "And the board?" Blackwell. "Still looking for opportunities to undermine me," Lawrence admitted. "But the quarterly results have helped. Our transparency about addressing the incident has actually improved customer loyalty metrics among younger travelers and business clients with strong diversity commitments." What neither mentioned directly was the toll these past months had taken on them both. Lawrence worked 16-hour days, balancing regular CEO duties with his crusade for reform. The stress showed in the new gray at his temples and the subtle lines around his eyes. Elijah, meanwhile, maintained excellent grades while developing his AI system and managing unwanted fame. He had received everything from speaking invitations to death threats, forcing him to be constantly vigilant about his personal information and physical safety. "Dad," Elijah said finally, "there's something I need to discuss with you. The Engineering Ethics Conference in Chicago next month has invited me to present our AI project. It would mean missing 3 days of classes, but Professor Rivera thinks the exposure could help attract development partners." Lawrence considered this. "You should go. This is an important opportunity." "There's more," Elijah continued. "They've also invited you to give the keynote address about corporate responsibility in addressing bias. It would be the first time we've appeared together at a public event since the interview." This was significant. Thus far, they had carefully separated Elijah's academic work from Lawrence's corporate reforms, allowing each to establish credibility in their respective spheres without appearing to trade on their connection. "Do you think we should do it?" Lawrence asked. Elijah thought carefully before answering. "I think it's time. Separating our efforts made sense initially, but we're both working toward the same goal from different angles. Appearing together might show how personal experience, corporate policy, and technological innovation can combine to create meaningful change." "I agree," Lawrence said, pride evident in his voice. "I'll have my team coordinate with the conference organizers." The following morning, Lawrence arrived at Skyline headquarters to find Charles Harrington waiting in his office. The board chairman looked troubled. "We need to talk about Officer Miller," Charles said without preamble. Miller had been on administrative leave since the incident, with his future at the airport uncertain as investigations proceeded. "What about him?" Lawrence asked, taking a seat behind his desk. "His union is fighting the termination recommendation. They're arguing that he followed existing protocols and that firing him would make him a scapegoat for systemic issues." Lawrence's expression hardened. The investigation found 6 previous complaints of racial profiling against him. All dismissed without proper review. This wasn't an isolated incident. "I know," Charles sighed. "But his attorney is threatening to go public with claims that Skyline is engaging in reverse discrimination to appease social media pressure. It could get messy. So we should retain an officer with a documented pattern of racial profiling to avoid negative publicity?" Lawrence asked pointedly. "That's exactly the kind of short-term thinking that allows these problems to persist." Before Charles could respond, Lawrence's assistant interrupted with urgent news. Miller had given an interview to a conservative news outlet, claiming he was being sacrificed to political correctness and that Skyline Airways was abandoning security concerns to appear woke. The interview spread rapidly online, reigniting debates about the incident. Some commentators defended Miller as a security professional making split-second decisions in a high-risk environment. Others pointed to his history of complaints as evidence of a problematic pattern. Lawrence called an emergency meeting with his executive team and PR department. "We need to respond, but carefully," Victoria advised. Engaging directly with Miller's claims could legitimize them and extend the news cycle. "What's our legal position?" Lawrence asked the company's general counsel. "The airport authority, not Skyline, is technically Miller's employer," the lawyer explained. "Their investigation found sufficient cause for termination based on this incident and previous complaints. His union is challenging that finding through established procedures. Our role is limited to providing evidence and testimony about the incident involving Elijah." Lawrence considered the situation. "Then we'll issue a brief statement reaffirming our commitment to passenger dignity and security protocols that don't rely on racial profiling. We won't engage directly with Miller's accusations or make this personal." Victoria nodded approvingly. "Measured and focused on principles rather than personalities. That's the right approach." After the meeting, Lawrence called Elijah to warn him about Miller's interview. "It's getting attention online. You might face questions or comments at MIT." Elijah had already seen the coverage. "It's frustrating but not surprising. He's fighting for his career. Are you okay?" This brings everything back into the spotlight just as it was starting to fade. "I'm fine," Elijah assured him. "Actually, Professor Rivera thinks the renewed attention might help highlight why our AI project matters. We're not trying to punish security officers, we're trying to give them better tools to make objective decisions." Lawrence marveled at his son's maturity. Rather than becoming defensive or bitter, Elijah consistently channeled his experience into constructive action. It reminded Lawrence of why he had adopted Elijah 13 years ago. Even as a quiet 4-year-old, he had shown remarkable resilience and emotional intelligence. The following week brought another challenge. Martin Blackwell had convinced several board members to question the scope and cost of Skyline's bias training program. He proposed scaling it back to focus only on customer-facing staff rather than the company-wide approach Lawrence had implemented. The numbers don't justify this level of investment, Blackwell argued during a tense board meeting. We're diverting resources from core business needs to address what was ultimately a single incident. Lawrence remained calm. A single public incident that revealed systemic issues. Our internal review identified 27 similar complaints that were inadequately addressed. This isn't about one passenger's experience. It's about a pattern that threatens our brand promise of treating all customers with dignity. The debate continued for hours, with Lawrence defending the comprehensive approach while Blackwell advocated for a more limited response. Eventually, they reached a compromise. The training program would continue as planned, but with stricter metrics to evaluate its impact on customer satisfaction and employee performance. As Lawrence left the boardroom, Charles fell into step beside him. You know, Blackwell is positioning himself as the fiscal conservative to your social justice warrior. He's playing a long game, trying to frame you as prioritizing politics over profits. I'm aware, Lawrence replied wearily. But I can't approach this differently and still look at myself in the mirror. Some principles aren't negotiable. Charles studied him thoughtfully. For what it's worth, I think you're right on the merits. This isn't just about social responsibility. It's about business sustainability. Airlines that fail to adapt to changing social expectations won't survive long-term. Lawrence appreciated the support, especially from someone who had initially questioned his approach. Thank you, Charles. That means a lot. Meanwhile, at MIT, Elijah faced his own political challenges. A conservative student group had invited Officer Miller to speak on campus about security versus political correctness, clearly hoping to provoke controversy. The university administration was caught between free speech principles and concerns about creating a hostile environment for Elijah and other minority students. Professor Rivera advised Elijah to ignore the provocation. They're trying to bait you into a public confrontation. Don't give them what they want. Elijah agreed, focusing instead on finalizing his presentation for the upcoming Chicago conference. The event represented a significant opportunity to showcase his AI system to industry leaders, academics, and policymakers. As the conference approached, Lawrence and Elijah coordinated their presentations to complement rather than duplicate each other. Lawrence would address corporate responsibility and policy change, while Elijah would focus on technological innovation as a tool for reducing bias. The night before leaving for Chicago, Elijah video called his father. Are we doing the right thing, appearing together like this? Some people will say I'm only getting these opportunities because of you, or that you're using me to improve Skyline's image. Lawrence considered the question seriously. People will say what they want regardless. What matters is our intention and impact. We both experienced this incident, you directly, me as your father and as the CEO responsible. We're both working to create positive change from different angles. There's nothing inappropriate about sharing that journey publicly. Elijah nodded, reassured. You're right. I just want my work to stand on its own merits. It does, Lawrence assured him. Professor Rivera wouldn't support a project that lacked substance, regardless of who proposed it. The following day, they met at Chicago O'Hare International Airport, the first time Elijah had flown commercially since the incident. Lawrence had arranged for a Skyline executive to meet them at the gate, ensuring no issues with security or boarding. As they walked through the terminal together, Lawrence noticed Elijah's tension. You okay? Yeah, Elijah replied, though his eyes tracked every security officer they passed. Just memories. Lawrence placed a supportive hand on his son's shoulder. What happened to you was wrong. But look at what you've created from that experience. An innovation that could prevent others from facing similar treatment. That's remarkable. Elijah smiled slightly. We're both trying to make something good come from something bad. Exactly. And together at this conference, we can show how personal experience, corporate policy, and technological innovation can combine to create meaningful change. Father and son continued through the airport, united by shared purpose and the knowledge that their journey, painful as it had been, might ultimately benefit countless others who would never know their names. 1 year after the handcuffing incident at Atlanta International Airport, Elijah Thompson stood at a podium in Skyline Airways corporate headquarters, addressing an audience that included security professionals from across the airline industry, civil rights advocates, technology experts, and media representatives. The Thompson Protocol isn't just a security system, Elijah explained, gesturing toward the screen behind him displaying data visualizations. It's a new approach to balancing safety and dignity. In the 6 months since implementation at Skyline's major hubs, we've seen a 42% reduction in passenger complaints related to discriminatory treatment, while maintaining all security performance metrics. The audience listened attentively as the now 18-year-old continued his presentation. Elijah had changed over the past year. More confident, more purposeful, his natural intelligence now focused on solving a problem he understood intimately. Still a sophomore at MIT, he had become a recognized voice in the emerging field of ethical AI applications for security. What began as a personal trauma, Elijah continued, has evolved into a model that other airlines are now adopting. The core innovation isn't the technology itself, but the principle behind it. Security decisions should be based on objective risk factors, not unconscious biases. In the front row, Lawrence Washington watched his son with undisguised pride. The past year had tested them both in ways they couldn't have imagined. Lawrence had faced a board rebellion, public criticism, and the enormous challenge of transforming Skyline Airways' approach to security while maintaining profitability. There had been moments when his position as CEO hung by a thread. But today represented vindication. Skyline stock had not only recovered but surpassed its previous value as the company gained recognition for leading industry reform. The Thompson Protocol, named by the board over Lawrence's modest objections, had become a competitive advantage, attracting passengers who valued both security and social responsibility. After Elijah's presentation, Lawrence joined him at the podium for a Q&A session. A reporter from Aviation Weekly raised her hand. Mr. Washington, some industry analysts initially predicted that implementing these reforms would compromise security or drive away customers concerned about safety. What would you say to those critics now? Lawrence smiled slightly. I'd say the data speaks for itself. Our security incidents remain at historic lows while customer satisfaction has increased across all demographics. It turns out passengers appreciate being treated with respect while also feeling safe. Another journalist asked, Elijah, you could have simply tried to put this incident behind you and focus on your education. What motivated you to develop the Thompson Protocol instead? Elijah considered the question carefully. When something traumatic happens, you have choices. You can let it define you as a victim, you can try to forget it, or you can use it as fuel to create positive change. I chose the third option. Why should my negative experience be wasted when it could help prevent others from going through something similar? After the presentation, Lawrence hosted a reception where airline executives mingled with civil rights advocates who had once protested against discriminatory security practices. The atmosphere was collegial, focused on shared goals rather than past conflicts. Across the room, Lawrence noticed a familiar face. Sandra Holt, the female security officer who had been present during Elijah's handcuffing. After completing bias training, she had been reassigned rather than terminated, and had subsequently become a trainer herself, helping other officers recognize and address unconscious bias. Lawrence approached her. Officer Holt. I wasn't sure you'd attend. I almost didn't, she admitted. But I wanted to see the results of the program firsthand. And she hesitated. I wanted to apologize to Elijah in person, if he's willing to speak with me. Lawrence nodded. That's his decision, but I appreciate the gesture. When asked, Elijah agreed to a brief conversation with Holt in a quiet corner of the reception. "I'm sorry for what happened that day," she said directly. "I followed Officer Miller's lead instead of questioning his assumptions. I failed to see you as an individual." Elijah studied her, noting the genuine remorse in her expression. "What's different now?" "Besides knowing who my father is. The training changed how I approach my job," Holt explained. "I still prioritize security, but I'm more conscious of potential biases affecting my decisions. I ask myself different questions before acting." Elijah nodded. "That's exactly what the Thompson Protocol is designed to support, better questions leading to better decisions." Their conversation was brief but meaningful, not quite forgiveness, but acknowledgement of growth and shared purpose despite their painful history. Ronald Miller had not been invited to the event. After fighting his termination through union procedures, he had eventually lost his position when the full investigation revealed a pattern of discriminatory actions. Last Lawrence had heard, Miller was working security at a shopping mall, still insisting he had been unfairly scapegoated. As the reception wound down, Charles Harrington approached Lawrence with a champagne flute raised in toast. "Congratulations. When you refused to back down a year ago, I thought you might be committing career suicide. I've rarely been happier to be wrong." Lawrence clinked glasses with his mentor. "There were moments I wasn't sure myself. Especially when the stock dropped 20% and Blackwell was gathering board votes." Speaking of Blackwell, Charles lowered his voice. "He's accepted a position with Continental Airways. Effective next month." "Can't say I'm disappointed," Lawrence admitted. His opposition made every step more difficult. Charles nodded toward Elijah, who was engaged in animated conversation with a group of technology executives. "Your son is remarkable. Most teenagers would have been derailed by what happened, either traumatized or seeking revenge. Instead, he created something revolutionary." "He's always been special," Lawrence replied. "Even before I adopted him, there was something in his eyes, a resilience, an intelligence. The incident brought those qualities into sharper focus." The following morning, Elijah prepared to return to MIT while Lawrence remained in Atlanta for a board meeting. They shared breakfast at Lawrence's home, discussing the previous day's success. "The airline industry is changing because of what we did," Lawrence observed. "Not just Skyline, but our competitors too. They're all implementing versions of the Thompson Protocol. Under different names," Elijah added with a smile. "No one wants to admit they're copying us." Lawrence chuckled. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. As they were finishing breakfast, Lawrence received a text from his assistant, * breaking news alert. Department of Transportation announcing new guidelines for airport security, citing Thompson Protocol as model, * Lawrence showed the message to Elijah. "Looks like we're going national." Elijah's eyes widened. "That means every major airport in the country will need to adopt similar standards. Your work is going to affect millions of travelers," Lawrence said, pride evident in his voice. "All because you refuse to be just a victim." Later that day, Elijah boarded a Skyline Airways flight back to Boston. Unlike the fateful day a year ago, this journey proceeded smoothly. At the gate, he recognized Heather Brooks, the agent who had witnessed his handcuffing but failed to intervene. "Mr. Thompson," she greeted him professionally, checking his boarding pass. "It's good to see you again. I completed the Thompson Protocol training last month. What did you think of it?" Elijah asked, genuinely curious. Brooks looked slightly uncomfortable but answered honestly. "It made me realize I should have spoken up that day. I was afraid of questioning security officers, but that doesn't excuse my silence." Elijah appreciated her candor. The goal isn't to make people feel guilty about the past but to create better outcomes in the future. As he settled into his first-class seat, Elijah reflected on the journey of the past year. The handcuffing incident had been traumatic, humiliating, and unjust. Yet from that moment of injustice had come meaningful change, not just for him and his father, but for countless passengers who would never know his name but would benefit from the reforms his experience had sparked. The flight attendant's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Skyline Airways Flight 1452 to Boston. We're honored to have you with us today." Elijah smiled slightly at the standard announcement, remembering how differently he had been welcomed a year ago. The memory still stung, but its power over him had diminished. He had transformed his pain into purpose, his humiliation into innovation, his anger into action. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Elijah opened his laptop to continue refining the next version of the Thompson Protocol. Professor Rivera had secured additional funding to expand the system's capabilities, potentially adapting it for other environments where bias affected decision-making, law enforcement, housing, lending, education. The possibilities were endless, and Elijah Thompson, once handcuffed and humiliated for flying while black, was now helping to unlock them. 3 hours later, as the plane descended toward Boston, Elijah's phone buzzed with a text from his father. Board unanimously approved global implementation of Thompson Protocol across all Skyline operations. Your legacy grows, Elijah smiled, typing back, our legacy, Dad. Couldn't have done it without you, the plane touched down smoothly. As passengers prepared to disembark, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Boston. On behalf of everyone at Skyline Airways, we thank you for choosing to fly with us today." Elijah gathered his belongings, reflecting on how a moment of injustice had become a catalyst for industry-wide transformation. The cold metal of handcuffs had left temporary marks on his wrists, but the changes he and his father had championed would leave a permanent impact on how airline passengers, particularly those from minority backgrounds, were treated. As he walked through Boston Logan International Airport, Elijah noticed security officers interacting with diverse passengers. He couldn't know for certain, but he hoped they were making decisions based on behavior rather than bias, on objective factors rather than unconscious prejudice. If even one person was spared the humiliation he had experienced, then everything, the public scrutiny, the emotional toll, the countless hours of work, had been worthwhile. Outside the terminal, Devin waited to drive him back to campus. "How was the big presentation?" his friend asked as they loaded Elijah's luggage into the car. "Better than I expected," Elijah replied. "The Department of Transportation is adopting our standards nationally." Devin whistled appreciatively. "From handcuffed to hero in 1 year. That's quite a journey." Elijah smiled thoughtfully. "Not a hero. Just someone who refused to let injustice have the last word." As they drove toward MIT, Elijah's phone buzzed with a news alert. Skyline Airways had just been named to the Diversity and Inclusion Honor Roll, a prestigious recognition of companies leading in ethical business practices. The stock was up another 3 points in after-hours trading. Elijah sent the article to his father with a simple message: "Doing the right thing turns out to be good business too." Lawrence's reply came moments later: "Always has been. The short-sighted just can't see it." Back on campus, life would return to its academic rhythm. Classes, research, social activities. But Elijah Thompson had been transformed by his experience. He had discovered his capacity to turn pain into purpose, to channel anger into innovation, to use personal trauma as fuel for systemic change. And in doing so, he had not only reclaimed his own dignity but helped create a world where others might never have theirs violated in the first place. What would you do if you faced discrimination like Elijah? Would you have the courage to transform injustice into positive change? Comment below with your thoughts on how one person can make a difference. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel for more powerful true stories, and share with someone who needs to hear that even the most painful experiences can become catalysts for transformation. Have you or someone you know experienced racial profiling? Let us know in the comments. Your story matters. This powerful story reminds us that systemic change often begins with individual courage. When Elijah faced racial profiling, he could have retreated into victimhood or burning anger. Instead, he channeled his trauma into innovation that transformed an entire industry. The story teaches us that our response to injustice matters more than the injustice itself. Lawrence demonstrated that principled leadership sometimes requires risking everything you've built. By refusing to minimize his son's experience, He showed that moral courage and business success aren't mutually exclusive, they're interconnected. True leadership means standing firm when faced with pressure to compromise your values. Perhaps most importantly, this story highlights how racial bias operates regardless of status or achievement. Elijah did everything right. He was well-dressed, well-spoken, following all rules, yet still experienced discrimination. This reality forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about unconscious bias in our institutions. The transformation we witnessed, from handcuffs to industry-wide protocol, illustrates that meaningful change requires both personal resilience and systemic reform. One without the other isn't enough. By working at multiple levels simultaneously, Elijah and Lawrence created lasting impact that will protect countless others from similar humiliation.